Hey folks, Sean Malin here of Cinemalin Film Commentary and Criticism, and of course this is our YouTube channel, We Just Got Better. Now, it's been a few weeks since we've done a review, but coming out this last week, actually in the last 2 weeks, have been two spectacular independent films. The first one that I want to review for you today is Sofia Coppola's The Beguiled, which won Miss Coppola, the Best Director Award at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year. Now, it's interesting about Sofia Coppola because as a member of the directing dynasty that is the Coppola family, including Francis Ford Coppola, his wife Eleanor, Sofia's mother, and Roman Coppola, her brother, who produces all of their films through American Zoetrope, Sofia Coppola has only made 6 films, but each of them has proven to be not necessarily a masterpiece, but certainly amongst the most thought-provoking independent films that exist and have been made within the United States. My personal favorites are probably Lost in Translation from 2004, the sort of magical intergenerational romance between Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson that won Sofia Coppola the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, and 2010 Somewhere, which I reviewed on this channel to quite divisive and I would say almost controversial opinions, because I found that Somewhere, which was a depiction of Hollywood ennui and the existence of a sort of star power gone dead since the Hollywood studio system, had drawn the ire of a lot of people who, you know, even though I found that it was quite a profound and almost existential Sartre-like meditation on that perspective in Hollywood. Alec Baldwin, the actor and producer and sometimes director, recently said on his podcast WNYC in an interview with Sofia Coppola that it was his favorite film, so I feel sort of vindicated by that. But today I want to talk to you about The Beguiled. It's her 6th feature film and the most recent film since she did A Very Merry Christmas for Netflix in 2015. The Beguiled is an adaptation of a Thomas Cullinan novel, which was already made into a film in 1971 by Don Siegel, the director of Dirty Harry, and the longtime collaborator of his star in The Beguiled, Clint Eastwood. Now, I haven't seen that film, and so in certain respects, I haven't done the research necessary to review this film as the reboot or the revamping of Universal's The Beguiled as it is. So I'm just going to give you my understanding of it as a Focus Features independent film released last week in territories all around the United States, without advocating for myself as an expert on the Beguiled literature, lore, and canon. This version of The Beguiled stars Colin Farrell as an Irish mercenary who's hired in the Civil War to fight on behalf of the Union. But while he's in the Union Army's employ, he is injured and forced into enemy lines in the Deep South, where while he is hiding out from General Lee's people, he is found by a young girl played by Una Lawrence, who is living at an orphanage sort of seminary, Miss Martha's Seminary. Miss Martha is represented by Nicole Kidman, and she has 2 women working under her. There is Kirsten Dunst, who plays Edwina, who's a sort of existential representation of the Sofia Coppola vibe, as she has been in Marie Antoinette and The Virgin Suicides, Coppola's first film as a director from 1998. And Dunst as Edwina is a sort of ethereal, wispy presence who, while grounded by Miss Martha's sort of arrogant, boisterous control of the women under a sort of Jesus-loving modus operandi, actually wishes to escape and is given hope for that escape by the bringing in of Corporal McBurney, John McBurney, played by Colin Farrell. Colin Farrell's casting here is a very interesting perspective, gives a very interesting perspective on Coppola's films, because he is perhaps the most strongly masculine figure that has ever existed in any of her other films, including The Bling Ring, Marie Antoinette, Virgin Suicides, and Lost in Translation. Farrell is an almost chameleonic version of masculinity, in that he represents masculinity at different stages. The vulpine, almost wounded version of masculinity when he is first caught and brought to the seminary by Una Lawrence's Amy. The seductive, almost lascivious masculine character who interacts with Edwina, Miss Martha, and the eldest of the girls at the seminary, Alicia, played with a devilish streak by Elle Fanning, also the star of Coppola's Somewhere. Elle Fanning has never had a role quite so lewd or you know, she's been described in the press as the bad girl. She is a sort of sexualized, young pubescent woman coming into her own at the age of 18, and she is exploring her sexual appetite with the presence of John McBurney in the seminary in a way that the seminary does not welcome, because of course this is a religious space. You know, imagine going into the Blue Mosque or to Notre Dame in Paris and suddenly finding that there's a wounded, feral, sexual male presence there. I feel that there would be an enormous reaction from any sort of people who would be sexually attracted to that person, be they a person who has had sex before or otherwise. In the case of the women who are living in the seminary with Miss Martha, the young girls, a couple of the other girls are played by Anne Jury Rice and Una Lawrence as one of the youngest. There are two other girls, 4 girls all together living with Edwina and with Miss Martha. You would think that there would be this explosive sexual response to the presence of a Civil War veteran, especially someone with the lustful appetites of a Colin Farrell. Now, Farrell is a very dexterous actor, as he's proved in the last several years. He could be both charming and elusive, sexual and aggressive, appealing and vulnerable, all while being sort of the archetypal male masculine figure in films like The Lobster and in Bruges, where he's both wounded and kind of appealingly strong. Maybe it's his height, maybe it's just his good looks, but Coppola puts him to excellent use here in The Beguiled, where he represents a much more multifaceted perspective on masculinity than I think he has in many of his films. Certainly this is not him in Horrible Bosses, you know. This is not the Colin Farrell who is going for big laughs or even turning on such a broad performance. Basically, John McBurney's presence in Miss Martha's seminary over the course of about an hour, several days in the time of the film, proves to be a sexual awakening for the women in a way that nobody is very happy with. He opens up Dunst's Edwina to the possibility of escaping from that part of the South, perhaps moving up north, perhaps going west, and finally escaping her father in Richmond, Virginia. The film was shot in New Orleans, and so there is a Southern Gothic element that evokes kind of this Faulknerian ideal of plantations. This is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof mixed with the violence of, shall we say, Saving Private Ryan or Men Go to Battle, the independent film that starred Caitlin Shield from a couple of years ago. But Southern Gothic does not necessarily mean horror, and The Beguiled, while it does have a sense of violence that erupts, sexual and menacing violence that erupts between the women and Corporal McBurney over the course of the film, does not necessarily have a Hitchcockian turn. It's certainly not a mystery thriller by any means, and although the advertisements have led people to believe that Beguiled will pick up exactly where The Beguiled from 1971 picks up, where there's a vicious man, he comes into a house and he's tortured by women, that is not the reality. Coppola, as usual, is after something far more ethereal, far more thoughtful, and again, Sartrean. There is an almost, shall we say, disengaged, disinvolved, and distant perspective from the camera people here that suggests that the relationship between Coppola as the director and writer of this film and the actors is not so connective or intimate as it was when she was working with Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray on Lost in Translation. Here, Philippe Lassorde, the cinematographer who she hired and who worked on The Grandmaster for Wong Kar-wai, among other films, shoots them in long-distance shots that often take a long time. The editing by Sarah Flack skips between faces, but the faces are always in medium-long shot. They're never really in these connective close-ups where we see the people, the characters, Kidman and Farrell especially, engaging in a sort of romantic look. There is very little lust in the film that isn't driven by the camera. As the camera starts to become increasingly close to the faces of the actors, the lust and the heat of living in New Orleans sort of catches up to the characters within the film. But again, this is no Hitchcock, and the film is far more philosophical, shall we say, and in distance than many of Coppola's films have been before. While it doesn't have the magic of a Lost in Translation for that reason, that doesn't mean that it isn't aesthetically magnificent, with Flack's kind of impeccably soft editing and Philippe Lassorde's pinkish, foggy, ashen, very beautiful, lightly colored Gothic imagery of the American South. Excellent performances all around, as is typical for a Coppola film, with Colin Farrell particularly standing out, and Elle Fanning in a surprising turn as Alicia. The Beguiled is sure to be an Academy Award consideration at the end of the year because Focus Features has produced and distributed it, and I hope you'll check it out. Thanks for watching, and check out cmfilmcommentary.com. Take care.